Numerous aircraft from World War II have achieved legendary status. Even if people don't necessarily know the names of these warbirds, they recognize the era they come from and what they represent. Very few post-war aircraft have achieved anything approaching that mythic level of recognition. One of the few that has, however, is the mighty Grumman F-14 Tomcat. This twin-tailed devil flew into the public consciousness during the 1980s and has since secured its legacy as one of the greatest aircraft ever built. This is a collection of Tomcat tales from my own days working on F-14s and some of my shipmates and friends who also got to work on this magnificent airplane. The Grumman F-14 Tomcat entered the fleet in 1974. By the end of the 1970s, it had already proven itself to be one of the top military aircraft in the world. It would go on to dominate naval aviation and indeed military aviation through the 1980s, 1990s, and even into the early 21st century. Although it joined the fleet in 74, it grew out of needs all the way back that dated back to the 1950s. The Navy was looking for a fighter interceptor that could defend carrier battle groups, as they were called back then, from anti-ship missiles. A number of designs were looked at and experimented with over time, one of which was the F-111. Unfortunately, the F-111 turned out to be too underpowered and too heavy to successfully operate from a carrier. The search continued until the Grumman Aerospace Corporation presented the Navy with a radical new design, the F-14 Tomcat. The F-14 actually borrowed a couple of things from the F-111, such as the variable geometry, the swing wings. But the F-14 was a unique confluence of design elements that created something truly legendary. The very look of the F-14 is a very muscular, robust, powerful aircraft that's also incredibly graceful and dynamic. Part of that grows out from the shape of the body. See, the F-14 is actually a lifting body, which means the body of the aircraft itself provides a great deal of lift. The faster an aircraft flies, the more drag it experiences from the air pushing back against the fuselage. Swinging the wings back reduces that drag, which allows the aircraft to fly more efficiently. Having the body of the aircraft to be a lifting surface enables those wings to go back without compromising the lift the aircraft needs to stay in the air. The original F-14, what became known as the Alpha model, the F-14A, was actually rather underpowered. That's why you see those jets having to go to afterburner to launch from a carrier. Now, despite being underpowered, the F-14 Alpha still dominated military aviation very quickly. The F-14 Bravo and then later the Delta model, or the Super Tomcat that I worked on, were upgraded to the GE F-110-400 engine, which was a much more robust engine and gave the Tomcat finally the power and speed it had been intended for. This video is not a general history of the F-14 airframe. There's other people have done that, and they've probably done it better than I ever could. This is a collection of stories of my own experience as an F-14 Tomcat maintainer and some of the anecdotes and memories of the shipmates I got to serve with. I wound up in F-14s by accident. When I converted to photography, I knew I wanted to stay in aviation because I was coming from a squadron as an admin guy. I wanted to stay in aviation, but I wanted to go into aerial photography. I wanted to be an air crewman hanging out the airplanes and helicopters taking pictures. When I graduated photo school in 2000, there were no aircrew slots available, but I had a choice to go to the photo lab on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN 71, or two F-14 squadrons, a VF-143 Pukin Dogs. Pukin Dogs, kind of a gross name, but actually kind of cool too. And a VF-213 Black Lions. Well, I had no idea what I'd be doing in those squadrons because nobody could tell me anything at the photo school. All they said it has something to do with tarps, but nobody could tell me why a flexible plastic cover you put over equipment, what that had to do with F-14s. Well, very quickly though, the Roosevelt went out the window. Yes, I'd be on a carrier, but I'd be ship's company. Something I wanted, but I had a chance to get back into aviation in a squadron. So I had no idea what I was going to do. Total shot in the dark, but I'll take it. I chose VF 213 over 143 for one reason. 143 was going to be deploying within a couple of months of my arrival if I took those orders. So I chose the orders to VF 213 because I would get there just before the squadron started the year-long workup cycle for deployment, meaning I had the whole normal workup cycle to train. One of the guys I was going to work with at 213 drove up from Virginia Beach and met me at DINFOS, the Defense Information School, and that's when the whole dark tale came out about what I really got myself into. Yeah, you can carry a camera in your tool pouch and take photos on the side, but you're not a photographer. You're going to be a pack mule on the flight deck. In the world of Tomcats, TARPS stands for the Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System. 17-foot long pod, weighed about 2,000 pounds when fully loaded with camera and computer. So big it had to go under the aircraft, between the engines. It was an afterthought. The F-14 was never designed to be a recon aircraft. When the Navy retired the last dedicated reconnaissance aircraft, they were going to build a reconnaissance variation of the F-18 Hornet. But in the interim, they still needed an aerial reconnaissance system, so they designed this TARPS pod as a stopgap for maybe 10 years or so. Sling it on the F-14. F-14 can do photo missions for about a decade. We get the Hornet online. All good. That Hornet variation never came online. The F-14 carried the TARPS pod for 30-something years. It was that good. So I kind of had a double reaction. On one hand, I was horrified. Like this was nothing I trained for, nothing I'd envisioned, nothing I'd even heard about when I converted to photography. It was completely out of nowhere. On the other hand, holy crap, I'm going to be actually working on F-14s, not just taking pictures of them. I'm actually going to be a mechanic. And all my best friends at my first squadron when I was an admin were mechanics. I'm going to get to be one of them. So it's kind of a horrified and excited at the same time. The TARPS pod was not the only system we had to work on. It wasn't just a matter of dragging this big old pod under the F-14, clicking it in place, and calling it a day. Life is not that simple. Excuse me. We had to work on the air conditioning system a little bit because the TARPS pod, those cameras had to be kept in a climate-controlled environment. So the jet's air conditioning system interfaced with the TARPS pod. I am not an F-14 Tomcat HVAC guy. We would work with the AMEs, or Aviation Structural Mechanics Safety Equipment. AMEs are a specialized community within the larger aviation structural mechanic rating, and they're responsible for all the life-saving and life support equipment on the aircraft, such as the ejection seats, the oxygen system, and the air conditioning system. If we had a problem with climate control in the TARPS pod, we would have to get the AMEs and work with them to fix it. We also had a ton of wiring on the jet we had to work on. The TARPS pod and the lantern pod, and I'll tell you about the lantern pod in just a moment. Their control boxes went in the same place in the cockpit in the back seat, so we'd hop in there and have to switch out control boxes. Well, these control boxes are connected to the wiring by what's called a cannon plug, which is a really honking big plug that you put in and click. Some of these plugs would take 10, 15, 20, 30 foot-pounds of pressure to click into place. Ideally, you should be able to grab it with both hands and click. In reality, we're often sticking our hands in these little spaces where we couldn't even see it. We're kind of feeling around, getting our fingertips on these plug. Oh, there's the plug. Get it together, and then you're using your fingertips to try and click 30 foot-pounds or so. Those tight connections were necessary because you wanted to ensure that those plugs wouldn't unplug while the aircraft is vibrating while maneuvering at speed. So that created a lot of electrical wiring we had to deal with. Now, electrical wiring goes into cameras, so that's not totally out of our wheelhouse, but we're not experts in it. The aviation electricians mates, the AEs, they would help us out whenever we needed it. That was pretty cool. Which brings us to the Lantern Pod, the low altitude navigation targeting infrared for night. This is a 6-foot long pod, and it would configure on the F-14 under the right wing on Weapons Station 8. This is another story of Navy logic for you. The Lantern Pod has nothing to do with photography. The infrared video it captures, that system is a whole different capture system than the optical systems we trained on for visible light. This pod also put out the laser that laser-guided munitions would follow to target. Like I said, it's completely electronic, but they gave it to the photographers. Ideally, we were supposed to have an aviation electronics technician, an AT, assigned to our shop to help out. In reality, manpower just wasn't there to do it, so we had to figure it out on our own. But I got to give a shout out to the AT shop. They gave us a lot of guidance in dealing with the Lantern Pod's electronic entrails. Another funny story about the Lantern Pod, when I'm at the squadron, new guy checking in, trying to figure all this out, still caught in that moment of, oh my God, I'm terrified. What did I get into? And holy crap, I'm living a childhood dream. You're going to be working on the Lantern Pod, Petty Officer Miller. It's a completely electronic system, and don't worry, you'll get it. My response? I failed aviation electronics technician school. Their response? When I joined the Navy, I wanted to go into aviation. I did want to get ship's company eventually. That was one of the goals. But I wanted to go into aviation maintenance because I did know that besides working in squadrons, you had aviation maintenance guys as ship's company on carriers and smaller decks to support the aerial mission. So it was going to be the best of both worlds. I go to boot camp, I leave boot camp, come down here to Pensacola. That's how I ended up here for my very first school. Got into aviation electronics technician school, and turns out with electronics, I suck worse than a broken Hoover vacuum cleaner. So I failed out of that school very quickly. Only school in my life I've ever failed out of. It didn't occur to me, because so much was happening those first couple of months in the Navy, and I was so stressed. It didn't occur to me to try aviation structural mechanics or something else. I would turn out to be really good, a really good structural mechanic, and that's part of this story later on. But I was smart enough to know that everywhere has admin people. So I went to yeoman school at Naval Air Station Meridian, Mississippi. Everywhere's got admin. I can go anywhere in the fleet and figure out what to do. Interestingly enough, I leave yeoman school and end up in a EP3 squadron in Spain. I spent most of my free time down in the hangar because that's where my buddies were. While I was at VQ2, they put me in the public affairs office because I was a shutterbug and a pretty damn good one. And I now had a chance to find out in practice that I was really enjoying photography on the operational side, and I enjoy public affairs as a side gig to help out, but it's not what I wanted to do. So I go to photo school and end up in F-14s. I joined the Navy to go to aviation maintenance. Fail out of that, go into admin. Admin sends me into a squadron, and from a squadron, I go to photo school to go back into aviation maintenance. Nothing in my life is ever straightforward. Naval Air Station Oceana is located in Virginia Beach, Virginia, one of the 7 cities of the Hampton Roads area. When I got there in 2000, Oceana was the last master jet base that housed the F-14s. The Tomcat fleet was already starting to shrink. The F-213 occupied Hangar 500 all the way at one end of the flight line. Now, these are long hangars with numerous squadrons in each one. I was intimidated when I got there. I was disorientated, but I was also excited and jazzed. One of my early days there, a couple of guys from my shop took me out to start orientating me to the general flight line, start doing the basic safety briefs, procedural briefs, the normal things. We climbed up on the back of one of our Tomcats. My heart stopped for a minute because there was just this sea of F-14s going all the way to the horizon. For just a moment, I felt like a 9-year-old boy watching a movie. And then it kind of hit me that I'm now part of this. and it was a really cool feeling. Jason Chapman was one of my buddies at VF-213. He sent me a couple of sea stories that took place with the Black Lions a few years after I had left, but he was still with the squadron. He asked me to read these for him, so here are Jason's misadventures. The command sent me out to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri as the only maintainer on a rescue jet to go fix a stranded jet. This was around 2004, I think. Also, keep in mind this was only about 3.5 weeks after I had torn my rotator cuff. I kept asking maintenance to let me talk to the aircrew directly so I could take the correct parts to fix the jet, but in accordance with Navy logic, that never happened. When I got out there, the pilot in Rio pointed out what was wrong, and, of course, what was wrong was absolutely not what I had the parts for. It ended up being an accumulator under the port walkway above the ramps in the intake. Those are the ramps that adjust the airflow when the jet's going supersonic. I got the jet fixed, but that wasn't exactly the most fun jet I was ever on. But somehow my shoulder didn't die on me. But it still hurt. I did have some good times on det, even by accident once in a while. I was down with the squadron at NAS Key West, and there was one morning in the barracks room when I couldn't find my bag to pack my lunch in. Well, being the resourceful sailor that I am, I had an empty beer box in my room, so I proceeded to pack my onion rolls, mayonnaise, cheese, roast beef, and chips in the empty beer box and used it like a lunchbox. We caught a ride in one of the vans to go to the hangar, but at this time the hangars were being remodeled, so we were working out of a trailer. I walked in the door, and at the time, Sean Rumbley was the maintenance material control officer. He saw me walk in with a beer box and proceeded to say, "Chappie, what the fuck are you doing?" Once I explained to him that I was just using the box as my lunchbox, he started cracking up. Apparently, I about gave him a heart attack because he really thought I was coming to work with a 12-pack of beer. Working on a flight deck is to be part of a mechanical ballet, an industrial production, if you will. Everybody's got a role, everybody's got their marks they've got to hit, and if you don't hit those marks, at best, flight operations are negatively impacted. At worst, people get hurt. So it's important that we train as hard as we do in order to keep from, frankly, getting killed or killing somebody else. One of the most famous aspects of flight deck life that most everybody sees when they watch the news are the colorful jerseys and float coats that we wear in order to be identified on the flight deck. I was a maintainer, general maintenance, so I wore a green jersey. Ordnancemen and the damage controlmen, the firefighters, wear red. Plane captains, who are junior enlisted personnel that are in charge of basic cleanliness, preparing the aircraft, they kind of own the aircraft in a way. They wear brown. Purple jerseys are the fuelers. They handle the fueling system. Yellow jerseys and blue jerseys on the flight deck are ship's company. The yellow jerseys are plane directors. They move the aircraft around and direct on-deck operations and movement. Blue jerseys are basically yellow jerseys in training. But there's more to understanding what goes on the flight deck than just the color of our jerseys. The alphanumeric codes on our cranials are actually more important for identifying a specific individual than just the color of the jersey and the cranial. This is the cranial I wore in VF-213. A lot of times these are just thrown away when a sailor leaves the squadron, so it's basically I saved it from the trash to keep it. One of the things I was able to do a little bartering with, there is a barter system aboard ship. You can trade sodas to get things done. As a photographer, I could trade taking pictures for people, so I got a lot of help from our PRs and other people. One of the things I was able to get a hold of, if I can pull it out here, Set that down, is a skull cap. These are generally reserved for the aircrew, and yes, it's dirty as hell because despite washing it, I still wore it on a flight deck for a long time. But it just made putting the cranial on a lot more comfortable because it covers the hair. This is the second set of decals I put on my cranial. The original set, I tried to do a little flare and look really cool. I wasn't quite satisfied with it, but after 9/11 happened, and that's a whole separate story coming up, I wanted to do like a lot of people and put and kind of mark that on my cranial, but at the same time, I wanted to be have a little more finesse about how I did my own decals. So I stripped all the decals off these shells and put this new one on with the 1V. There you go. Sparky, my nickname, and the VF213. The Sparky and the VF213, those were optional. Some air wings are really strict and you can't do anything like that. We were in Air Wing 11 at the time, and they were a little looser on the rules as long as these main alphanumeric characters were not obscured. And I'll explain those in a minute. So I did that on the back. On the front side with the new 1V, I also took a leaf from some of the graphics I've been seeing after 9/11 with a Pentagon and World Trade Center symbol. Now, what does this 1V mean? The first character matches the nose number of that Airedale squadron in the air wing. When we were in Air Wing 11, all our aircraft had nose number 100, 100, 101, 102, etc. So all of our flight deck personnel, our cranials had the number 1. This meant that even at a distance, anybody looking at us would recognize myself or my buddy Christopher Hockey or any of the other Black Lions as Black Lions. The letter identifies our rate. For example, as a photographer's mate working on photo reconnaissance equipment, I wore the letter V for visual. Christopher Hockey, as an aviation electrician's mate, wore the letter E. The ability to identify each other quickly and accurately is critical to keeping the airplanes moving on the flight deck. In fact, there's a whole sign language we use up there on the roof, but to use it accurately, you've got to be able to make sure you're talking to your guy and not an Airedale from some other squadron. Skull cap, great fashion statement. When we weren't doing flight ops, a lot of us, and you'll see this in the news, we just throw this back like this. And wearing my cranial back like this is how I got hit by a Sidewinder missile. True story. Sidewinder missiles hang under the wings of the F-14 on one of the upper weapon stations, and they got these really pointy forward fins. Well, the lantern pod configured on Weapon Station 8 just under one of the Sidewinder missiles. One morning I had one of my new airmen with me, and I was teaching him how to do the pre-flight sequence on the lantern pod. There's a small gauge on the side of the pod we had to check, so I was teaching him how to read the symbology. Once we were finished, I stood back up and rammed my forehead right into that pointy fin of a Sidewinder missile. Boink! If I'd had this cranial this down just a little bit, wouldn't have hit me, but it went right in the middle of my forehead, and I ended up with a bullseye-shaped bruise on my forehead for about 4 or 5 days. And I made sure I did not get near a camera during those 4 or 5 days. So yes, I have actually been hit in the head by a Sidewinder missile and survived. Not many people can tell you that story. I met a couple of hundred people at VF213 because we had a couple hundred people in the squadron. I can't mention everybody I met and everybody I knew there because there were a couple hundred of them. I don't think you're going to want to sit here watching this video for the next 12 or 13 hours. And it's been over 20 years. Unfortunately, a lot of names and stories have receded into memory because I've come a few 100,000 miles further on in life. We all do in 20 years. But there are a few stories I do want to relate because, for one thing, they're kind of funny. But on from another perspective, they also kind of give you an idea of just the characters that I got to meet while I was serving in the Navy. One of my good buddies at the squadron was aviation electronics, aviation electrician's mate, second class, Christopher Bonconsiglio. Everybody called him Bruno. I had just gotten the squadron. This was early September 2000. I was still a photographer's mate, third class. I hadn't put on second yet. We're out on the flight line, and I'm standing there, blue coveralls, cranial, got a tool pouch, have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Well, one of the jets that were spinning up, something broke, something electrical. The AEs who were there gathered around the jet for the launch cycle jump into action. Open up the jet, look at the panel, take their readings, pull the whatever the component out was, and they tell me, "Hey, go to the shop, run back to the hangar, go to the shop, get Bruno. Tell him we need whatever the component was." And I said, "Sure. Who's Bruno?" "Oh, really big guy, really big guy. You'll know him. He's in there, bald, really big. Just go." So I take off and I go running down the flight line back toward Hangar 500. I run into the AE shop and I looked over, and as soon as I looked over, there's this big, burly, bald guy stand up and looked at me. He was at the desk working on some file. He stood up and looked at me. I realized, oh, big, burly, brawn guy. That's got to be Bruno. I saw his name tag. I tend to be a little formal when I don't know somebody and I'm meeting them the first time. Everybody called him Bruno. I saw his name tag, so I said, Petty Officer Bonconsiglio. And Bruno looks at me and says, "What did you say?" And I said, "Petty Officer Bonconsiglio, this whatever the jet was needs this certain component." He said, "Stop. You said my name. Nobody around here can say my name. That's why they call me Bruno." And I just looked at him like he was dense. I said, "What's so hard about Bonconsiglio?" And he shook his head, started laughing, grabbed his cranial, threw it on, snapped on a tool pouch, grabbed the component. This was like a 30 or 40-pound component. These components are not light. Puts it on his shoulder. And this man, he's a little shorter than me, but broad, big, strong guy. He should have been an Olympic sprinter. He was out that door, through the hangar, and down the flight line so fast, he left a fire trail on the deck. Not every meeting is quite as humorous as what I had with Bruno. Some are more dramatic, some are just there. That's just real life. Interestingly, one of those that was just there was Chief Aviation Structural Mechanic Earl Frazier. He was our day check flight deck coordinator and flight line coordinator when we're back at the beach. Every squadron has two flight deck coordinators, a day check and a night check. And they're responsible for coordinating everything that squadron does on the flight deck with flight deck control. On shore, air traffic control really only gets involved when our aircraft are moving to the taxiway or runway. But aboard ship, flight deck control needs to know everything we're doing so they can relay that information up to the air boss who controls the entire flight deck. This is why each squadron has a flight deck coordinator. I met Chief Frazier the first time at Fallon, where I cut my teeth. I'd only been in the squadron a couple of weeks, and I had to go to Fallon because the tarp shop there, the Black Line tarp shop, between being undermanned, a couple of our guys having schools and other issues to go to, I was the only person available to go to this little 2-week detachment at Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada, where there's a bombing range that the Air Wings use. We'd sent a couple of lantern pods on the detachment because the aircrew had to train with them. The other maintainers shocked the hell out of me by just how quick they were to help me keep those pods operational and take the time to give me a really high-speed, low-dry course in basic flightline operations. I probably met Chief Frazier actually back at the beach, but I don't remember talking to him until we're at Fallon, and then just kind of evolved that he's just there in my memory. There's no meeting specifically. He just kind of fades into the picture. He looks like a good old boy, wiry, got a big old mustache that was within regulations, but still somehow managed to look like a life form on its own. And once in a while he'd shave it, but usually that mustache preceded Chief Frazier onto the flight line. I first really interacted with him when I'd actually lost a glasses case. Losing anything on the flight line or flight deck is a really bad idea. One of the first safety videos I had to watch about flight line and flight deck safety involved the damage loose objects can do to an aircraft. This video involved the crash of an F-4 Phantom II that was being delivered to the Navy. This was the aircraft's first flight. It takes off and the flight controls jam. The crew has to eject and this brand new aircraft crashes, blows up, it's destroyed. The later investigation found that a small socket had gotten jammed into the pilot's control stick. So as soon as he pulls back to take off, this little socket falls into place, locks the stick, and so the aircraft is out of control. That's how dangerous loose objects around an aircraft can be. I couldn't find that damn glasses case. I was freaking out. It was early morning, about, well, I shouldn't say that early. It's on 8 or 9, but it was before we had to fly. I'm jumping in every freaking aircraft, going through every cockpit. I'm going through my pockets. I'm going through my tool pouches. I'm going through the tools box I brought with me from the shop out to Felon. I actually cut my arms up and I was bleeding because I was sticking my hands into places that anatomically I shouldn't have gotten them into, to see if maybe a glasses case like this had managed to fall into a space like this. I was panicking. I got to talk to the chief. So I go find Chief Frazier on the flight line. And I walk up to him, said, "Chief, I got a problem." He goes, "What's up, Sparky?" I have no idea how he already knew my nickname was Sparky, but he did. "What's up, Sparky?" I opened my mouth to tell him I lost my glasses case, and I started crying. I was so stressed, I just broke down. I got myself under control really fast. Now I'm humiliated because here I am, a big, strong man crying in front of the chief. I felt like an idiot. I told him, I'm rushing on. I lost my case. I lost my glasses case. It's not in my shop. It's not my toolbox. It's not my tool pouch. I've been through every aircraft. I've been through every cockpit. I can't find it. And I'm waving my hands around and I'm hysterical almost because I'm so terrified. And he says, "Stop, stop, stop." Reach out of his back pocket. "Is this it?" I almost fainted. I said, "Yeah, where the hell was it?" He said, I found it under your tool bench in the hangar. I was coming out to give it to you. The one place I hadn't looked was under the tool bench in the back, so it fell out of my pocket or something and scooted back there. I almost fainted. I really almost fainted at that moment. Never forgot that, though. He didn't humiliate me. Years later, as we're on the flight line back at, no, excuse me, we're on the Carl Vinson still on our way home, but we're on the Carl Vinson. We were talking about me getting orders to shore duty at a photo lab. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you looking forward to that?" I said, "Well, it's going to be nice to slow down, and I'm going to a photo lab on Guam, a tropical island. I've had fun here on the flight deck. Go see what the photo lab's like. Maybe I'll like that a little better, but at least I'll know and make decisions for my career." Sparky, you'll be back. You're going to miss this shit too much. You're too good at it, and you fucking love it. Unquote. I realized in that moment that, one, he was right. I love this stuff. And I did need to go to shore duty because, well, they're orders and you have to rotate. But in that moment, I realized he's right. I love this. This is where I feel like I belong in the Navy. I'm coming back. Of course, that didn't happen, but that's a different story. I also saw him literally kick somebody off the flight deck during a workup. So one of our guys in the squadron was being a real Badinsky. Chief finally told him, "Get the off the flight deck, get below, I'll deal with you later." The guy kind of gave him an attitude turn and started just sauntering toward the catwalk to leave. Well, there's an airplane trying to move over here. There's a ground unit over here trying to go to another airplane. So this guy's in the holding up traffic, and Chief Frazier just well, I can't show you here, but he picks his foot up. He put his boot in that guy's butt. He literally kicked him in the butt and knocked him off the flight deck down to the catwalk. A number of us, myself included, actually cheered. He was a good guy, and I have lost touch with him over the years. I haven't been able to track him down, and if I can find him and get back in touch with him, assuming he's still alive, I would love to. He was one of the two chiefs that were the model for me when I put on Chief Petty Officer. I discovered the F-14 Tomcat in 1980 when I was 9 years old. We went to see a little movie called The Final Countdown. Starred Kirk Douglas, Martin Sheen, James Ferrantino, and Catherine Ross. The premise of the movie is that the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, CVN-68, gets thrown back in time from 1981 to December 6, 1941. Clearly, we have a morality tale going on here. Do we attack the Japanese before they attack us? What happens to the future if we change our past? Getting to see life aboard the Nimitz, to this day, that is still one of the best movies if you want to get an idea of what life is like aboard a ship. Most of the extras were the ship's company and air wing, so you're seeing sailors portray sailors. The standout aircraft, of course, are the F-14s. Just seeing those things sitting on the flight deck with those rocket-like engines, those jaunty twin tails, even cooler, especially for a 9-year-old boy, wings that can move. These things look powerful and frightening, and they look like they're going really fast even when they're sitting still. Probably the standout sequence in the movie was when two of the 14s had to engage two Japanese Zeros. The Zeros had just strafed and destroyed a civilian yacht and were now going after the survivors in the water, so the F-14s step in to save those survivors. Logistically, it was a difficult sequence to shoot. The World War II aircraft were having to go balls to the wall as fast as they could, while the F-14s were having to go as slow as they could without falling out of the air so they could stay in the shot at the same time. It was a magnificent bit of flying and aerial footage. Never forgot it. Next time I saw F-14s was in 1986 in Top Gun, starring Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis. Although this one is much more of an adventure and does not present Navy life quite as it is, like the way the Final Countdown did, it presents the F-14 pretty damn well. Top Gun was the highest grossing movie of 1986. By the time it left theaters, the F-14 Tomcat had become forever embedded in American aviation mythology. My brother and I saw Top Gun in San Antonio, Texas. Our family was on our way from Clark Air Base in the Philippines to my dad's next assignment here in Florida, so we stopped in Texas to see some family and friends. Tom and I went to a mall, and I don't remember which mall, but that's where we saw it, and it was awesome. It was great. It was epic. We were blown away by it. But the funniest moment came after the film was over. The lights come back up and everybody's getting up and walking out and talking about how awesome this movie is and how great it was, and the F-14s were amazing. Several rows in front of my brother and I, this couple stood up. I don't know if they were military or not. The guy was young, military age, had the right haircut, but you never know. Whether this was his girlfriend or his wife, again, don't know, but his significant other. As they stood up, she turned around and looked at him and said, "Why couldn't you have joined the Navy?" By this point, the F-14 was probably the most famous military aircraft in the country, if not the world. It would go on to star in a few other films, such as the 1996 Kurt Russell and Halle Berry thriller Executive Decision. Another great film. It wasn't featured as much in it, but it had a very significant part toward the end of the film. Like everybody else, my brother and I, especially us as kids, thought the F-14 was great and we wanted to go fly them. Everybody wanted to fly them. Well, as I got older, the idea of being aircrew, as far as being a pilot, kind of went out the window because my eyesight's just not that good. But the idea of working on them, just being around them was still just the epitome of cool, but I just never saw how it was going to happen until I end up in VF-213 in the year 2000, and I'm there at Oceana. Now, when I was at Oceana looking at that sea of F-14s across the flight line, my mind for a moment defaulted back to when I was 9 and we first encountered the F-14 in the Final Countdown. But those childhood memories of being 9 years old were only buttressed and enhanced by having seen the 14s show their stuff in Top Gun and then later in movies like Executive Decision. So, a 9-year-old little boy who first encountered F-14s in a movie, 20 years later, at 29 years old, 28, almost 29 years old, excuse me, is now standing there for real. So, for a moment, it was kind of a flashback to being that little boy. Oh my God, I'm actually here. This is real. It was a very interesting introduction to an aircraft when I was a child that I would end up working on as an adult, and one I never forgot. Especially that lady looking at her significant other and asking him, "Why couldn't you have joined the Navy?" I'm leaving this guy's name out because this is kind of a little embarrassing. So we're going to leave this particular name out, but this guy was fastidious. He in shore on Liberty, when we make a port call or back at the beach, trust me, he would get the girls' attention because he was so perfectly coiffed and decked out, and he was put together. And kid had some style. But we're on the flight deck, and I get it that people don't like getting dirty. He hated being dirty. Okay, we can all understand that. Most of us didn't exactly like the fact that we kind of lived in grease and grime 24 hours a day. Even I come down from the flight deck and I take a shower before I hit the rack, it's still a shower on an aircraft carrier. Physically, I may be clean, but you don't feel like you do when you're at home. This young man was fastidious. He was trying to keep his float coat and his jersey and his hands perfectly clean, and he was annoying everybody, including me, because he wouldn't stop complaining about the grime. I don't know, the story may not say much good about me anyway, but I still love the story. I told him even that we don't like clean flight deck jerseys on the roof. And we call the flight deck the roof. I said, we don't like clean flight deck jerseys of float coats because most of the time, those belong to people who are brand new, don't know what they're doing. They're the greenhorns, if you will, from use that old expression. Little irony there, since maintainers, most of us wore green. It's kind of a badge of honor once your flight deck gear gets greasy and grimy, because it means it's showing that you're part of the team. You're in the environment. You're a flight deck sailor. Nothing worked. I told him, look, you're getting on people's nerves. Okay, you don't like being dirty. I get it. We all get it. You want to do the best you can to stay clean. You're fighting a losing battle, but stop advertising it. He wouldn't stop advertising it. And it got to the point where even I got pissed off. Like, I'm tired of this kid complaining and whining. I'm going to shut him up. And yes, I'm going to shut him up in a way that's not going to be nice, but at least it's going to be nasty and not really nasty. And if you have any knowledge of sailors, then when I say really nasty, you can get an idea where it's going. The best, most beautifully grotesque gunk on an F-14 Tomcat collected on top of the main mount, the strut that holds the main landing gear. Up there collected this gloriously grotesque gelatinous mass of fuel, hydraulic fluid, salt spray, and grime. Beautifully glorious ugh of gunk. One morning, I'd finally had enough. I could see all the black lines on the flight deck side-eyeing this kid, so I decided to act before he got himself thrown overboard, which would have qualified as bad. I walked up there. I got these gloves on. I tended to favor the mechanics brand gloves. A lot of us did because it was a good glove. And my gloves are dirty already, and I looked at him and I almost touched him right there. I was like, no, this isn't enough. I'm going to make it count. So I walked up the F-14, slid my hand, and got a bunch of that gunk on my glove. Walked up to him, said, "Hey, what? Hey," told his name. He called him. "What's up?" I said, right down his face. Two big black streaks right down that perfect face. He starts trying to wipe his face, sees it on his hands, starts wiping it on his uniform, then realizes he's getting his uniform dirty, basically going into a panic meltdown. Everybody around's laughing, and I said, "Oh," I looked at my hands and said, "Oh, hey, by the way, come here." He's like, "What?" I said, "Oh," I grabbed his arm and I cleaned my own gloves off on his sleeve. Yeah, he wasn't too happy with me. Everybody else was. They were all laughing their asses off, and so was I. That point got across finally to him. Another one of those shipmates at VF-213 that I don't remember when I met. He just kind of there in my memory from early days at Fallon, or before, I think that's when I actually met him. Anyway, aviation structural mechanic, second class William Bissonnet. We all call him Biscuit. Another guy with one of those mustaches that you don't think is in regulation, but actually was in regulation, but I still swear, like Chief Frazier's, Biscuit's mustache was a separate life form. Slight built guy, about yay high. He was lighthearted and had a lot of fun, but he took his craft seriously. And I picked up on that real fast. So when I wasn't doing tarps work, I was hanging with him a lot and the airframers, and I really got into structural mechanics. I enjoyed it. When the photographer mate went away, I tried to convert to aviation structural mechanics. Bill, Biscuit, paid me one of the greatest professional compliments I ever got in the Navy. Early in 2002, following deployment, he and I were both working night check back at NAS Oceana. One evening I was working with him on one of the jets on the flight line because I had no tarps or lantern work to do. Another one of his guys came out from the hangar because one of the aircraft in there was being a real pain in the butt. Something was wrong in the wing section. And he and I went to go take a look at it. So we hop up on this Tomcat. We're sitting there near the wing, or where the wing joins the fuselage. And I mentioned to him how much fun I had working on hydraulics and structures. He turns around and looks at me and says, Sparky, you're a better hydraulics tech than most people I know, and you're a frickin' PH. And then goes back to work. He set up a birthday dinner for me. I was brand new in the squadron. Hardly anybody knew me. Somehow, my birthday came up, and I think he was just asking me, well, when is your birthday? And I haven't mentioned, no, it's next week, November 19th. Oh, what are you doing? Nothing. I'm just going to go have dinner and just chill out. Oh, man, we can't do that. He told me to meet him somewhere. And where he told me to meet him is a somewhat nefarious and infamous strip club just outside the main gate of NAS Oceana. If you've been to NAS Oceana, especially back in the early 21st century, you know the place I'm talking about. He told me to meet him there, and I said, "Hey, I appreciate it, but I'm not into strip clubs. I'm just not my thing. Is just meet me there. Trust me, just meet me there." I didn't want to meet him there. I don't like strip clubs, but he said, "Trust him. I'm the new guy. I'm trying to kind of fit in, trying to make friends, and I don't want to just piss somebody off right off, especially when they're trying to do something cool for the new guy." Okay, so and it wasn't my birthday. It was like the day before, day after, but I drive out there and I see him in the parking lot sitting against his car. I had a 1991 Ford Ranger, and one thing for this place, it had a good parking lot. Big parking lot, really lit up, and for all the stories that I heard coming from what went on inside the club, nothing ever seemed to happen to cars outside. Like I said, it might be because there are so many floodlights, and every 2 or 3 minutes, a bouncer was opening the door, throwing somebody out, so there was always eyes on that parking lot. So I park and I get out of the truck. He goes, "Okay, hop in." Like, why? He goes, "Hop in, I'll drive." And we head into Virginia Beach, going downtown. No idea where we're going. I still don't know this place very well. We headed to an Applebee's on Virginia Beach Boulevard. That was pretty cool. I thought, hey, Applebee's, decent place, have a good dinner. But it wasn't just us when we walked in. That was where Bill, a biscuit, had another surprise for me. We walk in, and there's 10 or 12 people from the maintenance department. We're like, oh, what's everybody doing here? Biscuit says, well, hey, it's your birthday. Told the guys they all came out to have dinner. It's like, wait, you told all the guys it's the new guy's birthday and all these people showed up just for me? I honestly couldn't believe it. This guy didn't know me from Adam, and yet he still went to the effort of setting up, getting a birthday dinner together for me with all these other people from the maintenance department who also didn't know me. They did it just because I was the new guy and I'm a black lion and they did not want me to be alone on my birthday. Bill was a good guy, and to this day, I have never forgotten the act of kindness he showed toward a new shipmate. One of the first new airmen I ever had working for me was a young man named Sean Husong. I had come off the flight deck. I was float coat on, tool pouch on, cranial cocked back on my head, looking like crap, smelling probably worse. When John Gornflow, our PH1, told me, hey, we got this new guy. Can you go get him? It didn't occur to me to think about the fact he was coming directly from A school and, like me a couple of years earlier, probably had no idea what he was getting into. I walk into admin looking like a zombie that just crawled out of the swamp, and there's this kid sitting there in perfectly groomed dress uniform, clean shaven, blonde hair, bright face, perfect A school look. And I walk in, he glances at me, and I say his name tag, say, "Oh, Airman Husong. Hey, I'm PH2 Miller. I'm your day check supervisor." The look on his face. Most modern aircraft can start their own engines. Like your car, they have an electric starter that spins the engine fan blades until compression's built up, the engine lights off, and it's running itself. 14s didn't. We had to have an external starter called a huffer. At Naval Air Station Fallon, the huffer was built into a little pillbox in the flight line. We'd pull the air hoses out, hook them to the jet, turn that thing on. It would provide the air that would spin the fan blades to start one of the engines. Once that engine lit off, we could drop that hose off, and then they could use bleed air bled off from that engine to start the other engine. Well, on the flight deck, the huffers, are little jet engines that are built and attached to the back of tow tractors. So you have a little jet engine on the flight deck to start a big jet engine. For safety, when we'd have to start the 14s, I would drive the tow tractor and point that little jet in to the edge of the flight deck and point that jet engine out over the water so you're not throwing jet exhaust across the deck. Hook it into the 14, Huffer would run up, start the jet. Once it's running smooth, Huffer detaches and they drive off and we do our pre-flight. Once in a while, some extra fuel would kind of puddle up in the Huffer's exhaust area. So when they light the Huffer off, you get this beautiful fireball out the back. Foosh. By the way, foosh is a technical term. I didn't think to tell Sean about that. Those first couple of weeks that Sean was on deck with us, he was shadowing me wherever I went. He was working hard, but it still takes a little time to get trained for your flight deck qualification and just get the confidence to be able to operate alone. It's around 1800, so it's last day check launch. So once we get this launch cycle done, we go in downstairs, we're done for the day. We're leaning against the main mount for one of the jets behind us. That's the main landing gear. It's evening, so it's getting dark. They light off the Huffer. I happen to glance over there. Oof! Big old fireball. It was actually pretty gorgeous. Big, beautiful fireball. Not even a second later, I realized that Sean was streaking past me faster than the Starship Enterprise in warp drive. And this is the moment I realized how much your flight deck training really does kick in. He's just in a panic running. And now I wrote this down in my diary that night. This is the sequence that went through my head. Sean's running. Sean's in a total dead panic. Why is Sean in a dead panic? There's a Huffer right there. Oh, crap. I forgot to tell him that sometimes the Huffers put out a fireball. He saw a giant fireball and probably thought that thing exploded. Now he's in a total panic and he's running. He's just about to get past me and, oh, crap. Over there is an E2 Hawkeye with those really big honking turboprop propeller blades spinning, and just beyond that is an S3 Viking spinning up, and it's got those big low-hanging jet engines that just suck things up. Holy crap, he's about to get himself killed. I need to stop him. All that went through my head from the time that he started here next to me to the time he was just almost past me. Grabbed him by the back of the neck, pulled him into the biggest bear hug. I mean, I would just bear hugged him because he was struggling. The kid was terrified. Got him calmed down for a minute, and hey, are you okay? What happened? I said, that was normal. I forgot to warn you. I apologize. I said, look, just strike below, back to the shop, tell Petty Officer Gornflow I sent you down. You're not in trouble. We'll talk about this. I'll finish this up. This one was on me. It's okay. So I got him off the flight deck. Everybody's like, is your guy okay? I said, I forgot to tell him the Huffer will sometimes fireball. Oh, shit, man. Yeah, that happened to me when I was an airman. Scared the crap out of me. Get the jet launched. I head back down. Sean's kind of shaking. He's looking more embarrassed though than anything, and I understood why. So we sat down to talk. Sean, do you know why I grabbed you and stopped you? He's like, I was panicking and I didn't know where I was going. I said, exactly. You were heading right toward an E2 that was turning and an S3 Viking that were turning. So that's why I had to stop you. But I owe you an apology. I didn't even think it's such a part of this world, Sean. I said, I completely forgot that to a new guy, the Huffer doing what the Huffers will do sometimes would be terrifying. The next thing I told him is I don't want you to feel bad because facing fire for any human being, facing fire is terrifying. That's one of the greatest fears for our species. And for a sailor, fire is the greatest mortal enemy. If we're on land and fire breaks out, we call the fire department, get out of the building and run like hell. You're aboard ship, there's nowhere to run like hell, and you are the fire department. So it's not an easy thing to face. That story about him running and the thought process that went through my head, all those thoughts in that short space of time really taught me how valuable all those incessant drills were. All those tiring, stupid exercises and practice flight disasters and practice fires and all that crap. Because in that one moment when my guy panicked in the middle of something that was a terrifying situation for him, I had the wherewithal to actually think through the whole situation, take appropriate action to protect him and everybody else, and make sure he wasn't humiliated. I never, ever criticized safety training and safety exercises after that.